this is because this is a motion of excessively proud proportion. Because I think good sex is important, and I think that there are far too many people who aren't that good at it, and has a lot of problems in the lives of these individuals and the relationships that they form in their lives. So what do we think the problem is? We think the problem, the focus of sexuality education in current Western liberal democracies is misplaced. I.e., the whole concentration on that why safe sex is important is alright. We think that's a legitimate concern to have as a government. But what do we think? We think that good sex is equally important as having safe sex. I.e., having the ability to teach children how to engage your partners. Right? In fact, what is good sex? Right? Like how do we as government define good sex? Right? And there are a few things under this. Right? It's not just limited to how to care for your partner or how to utilize it, but also things like the importance of sex in relationships. Things like intimacy, things like why it should be mutually beneficial sexual relationships, or the kind of sex that you have, or how many times you have it, or how you have it affect your relationships and the intimacy involved in it. We think those things are equally important in terms of what is good sex. Right? Secondly, we don't think safe sex is unimportant. That all good sex incorporates safe sex. Why is that? Because telling the good sex essentially means that not only is the sexual gratification good, but the protection that you don't want to get a disease and die from it. I.e., the end result of having that sex shouldn't be negative on the individual. That's good sex, it's good for the individual. We will incorporate things like safe sex, right? The focus now will evolve to things like good sex and things like that. We don't think it's either or. We think both can be done equally well. So the question is, why is this important, right? Why should schools teach you how to have good sex? For a variety of reasons, right? First, the importance of physicality in relationships is extremely important. Not just the basic need that is a carnal need in individuals, and why part of mutual satisfaction is excessively important in relationships. The question is, why particularly now? For a variety of reasons. The fact that pop culture now, the whole influence, the importance of sex as part of relationships influences people to want to enjoy that kind of sex, right? The kind of notion that they see everywhere around them wants them to enjoy good sex, so that's why sex has become more important. Secondly, women empowerment, right? The fact that earlier in centuries women didn't feel a part of relationships and men could treat them whatever way that they wanted in terms of sexual gratification, and that wasn't important. But in current status quo, satisfaction for both partners has become excessively important, and women have been empowered to demand good sex from their partners, and that's extremely important. Thirdly, in current status quo, we believe relations are not just about love anymore. I think the fact that many people choose to have just sexual relationships and want to enter into these because of, let's say, work constraints or other constraints is something that's important as well. So also, things like self-esteem, right? Really there are harms to not having good sex, right? Firstly, not all individuals are inherently good at sex, right? So what are the harms? First, often we don't perform sexually. There is a lot of psychological problems. I.e., your self-esteem is undermined insofar as you feel inadequate when your girlfriend leaves you, right? You feel that you haven't done enough, or you aren't physically endowed enough to do well, right? Secondly, it harms the relationships and human interactions that you have with the loved ones. You may excessively love a girl, but that may be undermined by the fact that you may not be good at sex, and that she demands sex, and that's something that we believe is a harm that we want to mitigate. Before I move on,
would you include homosexual components within this sex education?
Yeah, exactly. We think it's open to all, right? We include all aspects of sexuality education. And we can cater to people who have different orientations and handle life. We don't see why that's particularly a problem. I hope that's not the case, right? Okay, so why particularly schools? And why is that important, right? First of all, we said the role of schools is not limited to insofar as educating them about the courses that they take. We believe that schools, being microcosms of society, prepare individuals for the adult world. We tell them to already establish the importance of sex and sexuality in your life as an adult. We believe that schools principally have a right, or principally have an obligation to these students to teach them about something that is so extremely important, right? So then opposition might ask, right, why are the current sources of sex not enough, right? Let's think of what the current sources of sexual intimacy are. I know as a teenager, when I was a teenager, right, my only outlet into sexuality was, let's say, things like pornography. Right? We think that's extremely pernicious. Why? Because most of the pornography caters around male-dominated pornography, in which men are always the dominant part of the relationship, in which it involves men always having the power of wielding it over women. So why is that? Because men form the dominant customer base. Men form the dominant customer base for these kind of pornographic films. As a result, most of these films are extremely male-dominated. Secondly, there are often no discussions of intimacy and its relation to sex in terms of pornography. Pornography is extremely physical and violent. It's only about the physical aspect. There's no balancing of intimacy, of love, or how you should treat someone, or the caring after sex, right? How you should build up into sex. These are things which aren't included in pornography are extremely important. That's a bad thing. Secondly, so then they ask, why not parents, right? So that's probably the only other thing where you can learn from. Firstly, really parents are inherently uncomfortable with discussing sex with their children. Why? Because the nature of these relationships is such that you often look up to your parents as someone who you respect and someone who cares for you in terms of maternal love or the feelings of paternity associated. Parents themselves are uncomfortable discussing sexuality because the only way they can teach their children about sex is probably by discussing their own encounters, like with their mother, right, with the mother and the father. That's excessively uncomfortable for these children. There's an inherent barrier for them to discuss this. Secondly, the one set of parents can only teach you sexuality insofar as they've experienced it. Right? That's a bad thing because that not just harms, let's say, individuals because they only get one aspect of how to have good sex. Like their parents will be terrible at sex and they might be teaching them that. It also harms minorities and people who have different sexual orientations because their parents may not have the same kind of perspective. Sit down. So why are schools the best paradigm? First of all, the fact that schools are extremely organized and formal. There's a credible source of information and there's a structured source of information. I.e., the fact that you don't get every aspect of the picture and it's a very structured curriculum. Right? Secondly, the fact that you can openly discuss it is extremely important. You can express your opinions because all your peers are doing it. That's also excessively important. Why is that? Right? Because insofar as, for example, like, you don't want to discuss your sexuality with other people, it's because you feel inadequate. Like, for example, you may not want to ask someone about how to have good sex because it's inherently problematic for you to admit the fact that you're inadequate. When it happens in a school, everyone is getting the same education. And everyone around you is getting the same education. I.e., you don't feel targeted for being inadequate in the first place. It's the fact that everyone gets the education and everyone is on an equal footing. Right? So what does the opposition need to do to win this debate today? They need to either show me why sex is not important and why it's not important in the lives of these individuals, or show me why schools should do this, especially the fact that school is the only place of learning where they shape individuals for their adult life. Or they can probably show me why porn is good, or why parents can discuss how to have sex in different positions, which I don't think my parents are open to. I think if I had education in school, that would be a good thing. So what have we told you today? We told you the importance of sex. We told you the fact that sex is excessively important, not just in terms of your self-esteem, but in terms of relationships that you engage in, and the success of those relationships. Right? We told you that schools are an important factor in ensuring your happiness as an adult, and this is a part of that. I have never been prouder of doing this.
I now call upon the leader of opposition.
Mr. Speaker, these skills are being taught in school and there will be an unrealistic expectation for teenagers to practice these skills, and that should never be the goal of sex ed. Because what is the formulation of sex ed even in Western liberal democracies? And this recharacterization is particularly crucial because they always teach, firstly, abstinence. They tell these children, always wait for the right person, never be rushed by emotions, always wait until you're absolutely sure that you're doing it with the right person, etc. And then secondly, depicts safe sex as a last resort and then proceed to teaching them the technicalities of safe sex. So what is the existing connotation that is embodied by their good sex syllabus that directly sends a contradictory message? Because people are not automatically good at sex. You have to practice the skills to become good. Your subject outcome is basically to become good at sex. You're basically telling these children, put myself out more at existing opportunities to become successful at this subject. You're making them more vulnerable to all of the harms like teen pregnancy, like STDs, like being emotionally vulnerable because safe sex is not perfect. Condoms can leak, which is why we always teach them abstinence first. So you're significantly changing the youth's culture of sexual relations, but in a way that the state has never prescribed to be the objectives of sexual education. So I'm going to do two things within my speech. How it harms the sex culture amongst the youth, and how it incites parental wrath of implementation of a sex policy. But before that, a few rebuttals. Firstly, they try to run away from this debate by saying the definition of good sex is also safe sex. We want to challenge that by saying that's false, because the motion itself puts a burden onto you to move from safe sex to good sex. To point to an example, a basic component of good sex anywhere could be oral sex. Maybe if the girl performs oral sex on a guy and the guy wears a condom, that's fine. If a guy performs oral sex on a girl, there will be exchange of bodily fluids. That is not safe sex in any way. So in many instances, these two things could be very well mutually exclusive, and we want you to try to defend the components of good sex, and when it can be unsafe in certain instances. Second rebuttal on women empowerment. This is also when they try to run away from this debate, because when we're saying things like understanding the school, there's male domination, etc., they're basically not teaching good sex. They want to teach morally conscious sex and all this equality within sex. Mr. Speaker, we say that can happen under safe sex right now because that's just technicality and principles, but we won't be made to defend status quo is producing good sex. I'm sure you can teach them in some other form than teaching them the skills of sex. Thirdly, they want to say, here's one harm. People don't have good self-esteem if you don't have good sex. That's exactly the connotation that we're directly opposed to. That you can only have confidence if you have good
about this importance of discussion of sexuality and sexual gratification. Secondly, I'll be talking about the government responsibility to protect these individuals. And lastly, I'll be talking about women empowerment. Right? But before that, three major points of department. First idea, right? Let's look at what kind of context they were living in. Right? We were talking about Western liberal democracies, where it's an inescapable fact that the rate of teen sex is increasing by the day. Right? And we believe that the safe sex campaign has worked to a large extent because teen pregnancies have gone down and so on and so forth. Right? However, we believe that sexual promiscuity is already an issue among the teens. We don't believe it to be something that we should refrain these individuals from. Right? We believe that sexual exploration is an inevitable part of the progressive societal evolution that we are currently in today. Right? We believe that media places an overt emphasis on sexuality. Right? We don't necessarily believe that to be immoral or something highly unjustified. We believe that society has a direction, society has a choice to choose the direction that it is heading towards. However, then, considering that being the case, it is then the government's responsibility to react adequately to it, to safeguard all its citizens, and in this scenario, the children, right? Especially children, because they're essentially going ahead and exploring their sexuality in the first place, right? Because they were never able to give us any sort of alternatives to considering this increasing promiscuity of the teens as to where they get that information. Right? They told you as to the pernicious nature of pornography and general pop culture, right? Because even if it's not really overt power imbalances, there are still those subtle power imbalances when within pornography, the female is still considered, like there's still those derogatory terms used during the sexual intercourse, right? We believe that pure physicality and that being dominated, even if subtly so, goes ahead and not only normalizes the idea of this certain sense of submission for women, but also increases the idea of the male dominance and increases those power imbalances in the sexual intercourse in the first place, right? Why is this essentially important for kids? And this is the second point of the bottom, right? Why schools are essentially important to go ahead and do this. Firstly, let's just make this clear, right? They agree that the impact that the schools have, so they agree that if schools are going to be something kids will listen, right? Why concede that? But furthermore, right, why do these schools are essentially important? Because these are the kids who will go ahead and are not really sure of where they're at, right? So they need some level of information as to what they should be heading towards, not just in the present, but even in the future, right? We reject the idea that it goes ahead and encourages any sort of idea of sexual intercourse within teenagers. Even if so, we believe that that's not something, as I already mentioned in my brief, that that's something that's happening as a natural evolution of society, and that's not something we should necessarily oppose in the first place, right? Secondly, we believe that considering the alternatives, it is the school's imperative and the government imperative, considering that schools are essentially tools of the government to promote certain safety and well-being in society, to go ahead and teach these individuals from an impersonal objective, right? We believe that this impersonal nature is especially beneficial to the alternative of parents when it's a one-on-one interaction which can get highly uncomfortable pretty quickly, right? They never really dealt with our idea on that thing. The last idea, let's rebut that idea of parental rap and how these individuals will pull out, right? We don't necessarily see this as standing, because first off, right, let's talk about their characterization, their re-characterization as to how it's necessarily shown as a last resort in schools, right? We don't necessarily believe that to be the case in the first place, that abstinence is touted as the first thing, and then only is the last resort, you know, if you're overcome by your sexual urges, then you go ahead and engage in safe sex, right? We believe that even if that is the characterization, then it's important to teach these individuals to have good sex if they are so overwhelmed by their sexual urges in the first place, right? We believe that this idea of parental rap is firstly something that won't necessarily come out because of the general idea, general agreement of the parents on the idea of public education, teaching sexual education. But furthermore, even if it does so, right, we believe that the state's responsibility is to protecting these very kids, right, from the harms of bad sex in the first place, right? So then let's move on to my point of substantive. But before that,
It's not about sexual promiscuity per se, but that safe sex in itself is not a perfect protection. So it has to be accompanied with abstinence not negated by your policy.
we believe that abstinence is something that these individuals, if they're so deep because of their conservative background, can still hold on to, right? If they believe that, if side opposition believes that the messages that they receive does do, firstly, like, schools don't necessarily go ahead and teach abstinence as their main fact. This is driven mostly by the religious or the background or the conservative background that these individuals come from. We believe that if those still exist, then those individuals can still go ahead and use this. Furthermore, it supplements their knowledge because at some point in their life, they will have sexual intercourse. We believe it prepares them better for the adult world in the first place. Let's move on to some substantive, right? First idea of the discussion of sexual gratification. We believe that currently a lot of individuals are vilified for their sexual preferences and the kind of ways that they receive sexual gratification with it. However, we believe
believe that an open discussion is something necessary to go ahead and normalize this idea, right? Not just about homosexuals, but even possibly certain devious sexual practices. These individuals need to be told beyond just their collection of pornography as to why this is possibly wrong and why this harms other individuals, right? It isn't just the morality that the state is pushing on these individuals, but also the very just protecting their physical and emotional well-being in the first place. Second idea, right? The government responsibility to protect these individuals. Considering that there is an increasing promiscuity, we believe that there is a high level of government responsibility to protect these individuals from harm. Right? We believe that that's something that safe sex, that's something that negates the idea that safe sex should be the be-all and end-all, because then it goes ahead and pushes this message forward that if we go ahead and engage in safe sex, that will go ahead and prevent all sorts of harms. That's not necessarily true, right? It will only possibly go ahead and prevent harms in terms of diseases, like okay, to rebut that idea of oral sex, the idea of vaginal condoms still exists, right? We believe that that can also be protected against. But furthermore, right, it's the idea of the other kinds of physical well-being that happens within the sex, right? Say possibly rough sex, so on and so forth. We believe that the emotional well-being is something important as well that's satisfied by the power imbalances that exist. We don't believe that this leads to greater pressure on beings per se, considering that that level of pressure already exists within society and we just help them deal with it better and rationalize it better, right? The last idea of women's rights, right? We didn't necessarily see this as just a moral justification from the government. We believe that women's rights is something that's necessary, especially in the age of increasing sexual promiscuity and sexual liberty, right? Women are also being increasingly seen as sexually active. However, many of them is the stud versus sluts classic example, right? Where women are seen and they're vilified for seeking repeated sexual gratification. We believe that this sort of education and teaching good sex, one that is mutually beneficial to both partners and equally beneficial to both partners, is something necessary on the status quo to go ahead and improve equality within the power imbalances that exist in the sexual intercourse, right? We believe that with all these reasons, we're very proud of
Mr. Chair, what I will be talking to you about in this debate is that I'm going to tell you that their proposal is an act by the state to prescribe to society what the definition of good sex is, and we think that is problematic because good sex is something that is personal and should be relative to different types of individuals within society, and this will be an extensive analysis which will also clash with the speaker before me. But before that, a few minor rebuttals towards the speaker before me. He said that this happens in the context of liberal democracies, hence the culture of sex and promiscuity is already normal and normalized within the societies. We have two responses to this. We think that considering that the trend is moving towards that, we don't want to exacerbate it by teaching good sex, because in order for them to fully appreciate what is taught in school, they will have to relive that experience, ladies and gentlemen, making them wanting to participate in the existing problems that we already have in liberal democracies. That is problematic because it increases the probability of these children being exposed to the dangers that we're trying to prevent when we're teaching safe sex. That is why we don't want it. We don't want to teach good sex in these schools, ladies and gentlemen. But they said that the alternatives are bad, and this should act as a counterbalance to the alternatives that are out there. We are not agreeing that the alternatives such as pornography and things like that is good, ladies and gentlemen. But we think that the counterbalance that they wanted already exists. Safe sex is sufficient to tell children that you don't have to follow the exercises that you see within pornography. That's why you have to wear a condom. That is why you need to practice, you have to have sex responsibly, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that is also crucial for us to maintain. But moreover, they are also, ladies and gentlemen, we think prioritizing sex as a central part of a relationship. Since they said that we want people to be empowered to have better relationships, and this was the imperative that started this proposal, ladies and gentlemen, we think that's problematic because now you're shifting the focus of children to prioritize sex and put sex at a higher pedestal to ensure that they have a meaningful relationship, and that is problematic because we think that it is very diverse and very subjective, ladies and gentlemen, of what makes a relationship work, and that should be left to individuals to make personal choices. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, all the benefits that they wanted to achieve in terms of not being, not subjugating women or teaching children that you have to give and take and allow women to pleasure themselves as well and things like that, it's not mutually exclusive to our side, because all those moral values or good values can be taught exclusively from a syllabus that is put specifically to teach how to have good sex. And and that's problematic. Because we don't know, it was very vague under their proposal. How would they teach this? Would you use the Kama Sutra book as your textbook, ladies and gentlemen? Would it be graphic, ladies and gentlemen? We don't know. Because and we have to assume that it has to be graphic. It has to show some acts that will lead to a person having good sex, and that's problematic. So let's look at my argument. We think that the proposal prescribes to society what good sex is. We have to understand that sexual gratification is relative to different types of individuals. There are different types of fetishes or ways in which people reach ultimate sexual gratification in their sexual experience. Their proposal obviously will have a syllabus or a definition or prescription of what good sex is, ladies and gentlemen. And this provides four harms. Firstly, it creates an unrealistic expectation on people to have sex, because individuals that can't live up to the expectation of what good sex is defined by the state, ladies and gentlemen, will now feel inferior. They will feel like they can't be a man or a real man or a woman when they're performing these sexual activities, because there are people who won't be able to live up to this sexual, to the definition of good sex that you have set. This is problematic, especially when we're talking about children going through that feeling of inferiority, feeling bad about themselves, not being able to be normal like other people, ladies and gentlemen. We think that it's reprehensible to put children in that state, and that's problematic. But before I move on to my second level, I'll take one.
So how can you show us that our paradigm of essentially supplementing the condom with the ideas of basics, equality and basic love and tenderness is better, is worse off than your paradigm of just telling them just buy a condom, do anything else you want?
No, it is sufficient, and yours don't make things better. That is why we think it is unnecessary, but it creates a lot more harms, and this is the harms that I'm talking about. So secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we think their proposal is discriminatory towards sexual minorities, ladies and gentlemen, because obviously in these mainstream schools, people like homosexuals or people that have different fetishes like BDSM or other forms of fetishes, ladies and gentlemen, would not be represented in this syllabus. Firstly, on the first level, we think that it's unfair, ladies and gentlemen, because you're not reflecting what other individuals feel need to achieve sexual gratification. But secondly, we think that because you're prescribing this to these individuals, people that have different fetishes will feel like as if what they're doing is abnormal. They will feel like weirdos or freaks, ladies and gentlemen, because the state is not including what they deem as pleasurable into the syllabus. And this is problematic because we think, ladies and gentlemen, now that feeling that they're facing harms the ability for them to develop as a child, because they feel intimidated, because they feel inferior to their peers, ladies and gentlemen, because they feel abnormal. We think it is harmful to put a child through the experience, and that's problematic. Lastly, we think that sexuality is something that is personal and should be left for individuals to explore on their own. What they are doing by creating a definition of good sex, ladies and gentlemen, is that they are telling individuals that if you want to have good sex, if you want to maintain your relationship, this is the only way for you to do it. And that is where we have a problem with. Because different individuals require different needs, and it has to be analyzed on a case-by-case basis, whether or not your partners need something that is different, whether or not you need something that is different. But when you create an arbitrary standard of what good sex is, ladies and gentlemen, we think it harms the ability for them to explore it on themselves, learning what is beneficial for them and what is not, because that is already prescribed by the state and you have to follow, because these are children, ladies and gentlemen. They have to follow what the school tells them. But lastly and very quickly, we think this proposal is offensive to victims of rape and people that have gone through sexual violence experience, because if you teach safe sex, ladies and gentlemen, we think that it is only an education that teaches you how to protect yourself. When you teach good sex, it is interactive. You teach them how to pleasure yourself and how to pleasure the other partner. And we think there will be images of these sexual activities that you have to show to these children in order for them to achieve this. We think this is traumatizing for children that have gone through bad experiences or been abused, sexually abused, ladies and gentlemen, to relive their experience within schools. And that is why we're extremely proud to oppose.
Sorry. Firstly, what is the value of teaching good sex to children and prevent teenagers and growing adults? And secondly, what is the value of teaching this in schools? Right? Basically, what is the goal of the state and why schools should be the avenue
as well. There is a growing need for teenagers to be sexually active in these relationships. That's not something which like sex education or teaching good sex is doing to them, right? It is the popular culture which is doing it to them. It is basically the evolution of idea of sexual liberation. It is just like the natural course of time which is doing this to them, right? So we tell you that there is already a pressure or there is already a need to be sexually gratified and to gratify a partner in a relationship. We are not creating an unrealistic pressure on them to do so. But then their idea was this, right? That all pressure already exists, don't exacerbate the scenario. We don't see a reason why teenagers should not be having sex, right? We think it is a very biological and very innate urge. There is no harm to it as long as it doesn't result in negative consequences, something which safe sex already covers. But then they tell us that the value of teaching safe sex is going to be diluted because now you are teaching good sex. We don't really see the logical link to that, because we tell you even if you teach safe sex for 2 minutes, given that the consequences of not having safe sex are quite great and are quite violent, we think that children are also going to look into these things and are also going to follow it because they do not want to get pregnant, they do not want to get infected by a disease. Like changing the focus is not going to change the actions of individuals. But then let's look at this idea, right? That we are prescribing to the society what good sex is and what different kind of but there are different kind of fetishes in the society. Again, something which got clear answered, right? In a PUI, we told you how the sexual education is not only going to be about teaching one particular one particular way of having sex. It is going to cover the diverse views that exist in society, the different fetishes that exist in society, homosexuality, and things of that sort. But if you're talking about even the different kinds of sex, we think that sexual gratification is to a large extent a science, right? It is about it is a biological mechanism, and there are ways in which gratifying a sexual partner can be taught. I think a lot of websites do that already. But then let's look at the idea of sexual minorities, the idea of sexual minorities and how they feel marginalized, right? We think the idea which Mani brought to you in his speech might be very unrebutted, right? We told you how it increases the discourse on how sexual gratification is important in the society and how different people have different opinions and different ways of attaining the sexual gratification, right? We think even if certain things are not covered in this syllabus, we don't really have to justify what that syllabus is. We don't see the reason for that. But we think that even if we were teaching different views that didn't encompass the particular fetish that they're talking about, it at least changes the discourse towards there being the existence of different fetishes in the society and that different people have different means to sexual gratification and all of these should be respected. But then let's look at this idea, right? It changes the narrative now, because now in relationships people will start expecting good sex, and if you're not able to provide that, then it decreases your self-esteem. We think that already exists in the status quo, right? Because let's look at what sex is. It is a very biological and innate urge, and being in a relationship, especially in a sexually active one, we immediately expect sexual gratification of your partner. So we think that need already exists. What we are doing is we are enabling you to fulfill that need so that your girlfriend doesn't leave you on the premises that you weren't good enough, right? But secondly, we tell you, given that you expect your partner to be caring, to be loving, to be supportive, and all of these other things, what is wrong in expecting your partner to be good at sex as well? We think that society has moved to this point where sex is a need that most people have in a relationship, and wanting the gratification of that need is not a bad thing. But then we talk to you about the idea of women and dominance, right? We told you how the popular culture and how pornography currently defines what good sex is, and that is derogatory towards women, that discriminates against women. It usually evolves from violence against women. We told you that is a bad thing. The only rebuttal to that was that safe sex and teaching about safe sex is enough to counteract this narrative, right? Without really telling us why. We don't see how teaching individuals to put on condoms or teaching individuals to use contraceptives is enough to completely nullify the description or the narrative that exists in current pornography against women, or that women should not be satisfied, or the only way women can be satisfied or engaged in good sex is when they are dominated. We want to cancel that. Only schools with mandated syllabus that teaches you about good sex can do it. But before I go on,
considering that sex is something that is personal and you're bringing that topic into a public space, how would sexual minorities have the courage to share their sexual experience in a class filled with their friends that have differing sexuality?
it is at least better in a scenario when every discussion is shoved under the carpet and the discussion of sexual gratification is not even in the picture. But secondly, we tell you the moment discourse happens, the moment you start understanding the value of sexual gratification, that it is a need that every individual has, you also start discussing about your avenue of attaining that sexual gratification. We are not teaching a one-size-fits-all policy. So quickly then, why are we teaching this in schools? Again, I want to talk to you about the role of the state, and we told you individuals who have different fetishes than you do. But secondly, we also know that the importance of teaching it in schools is that it is not targeted. You do not have to ask these questions and concede the fact that you were sexually inadequate, right? Because it is something which is taught to you from an external perspective. It is not targeted and personal, which is a huge benefit of teaching with sex in schools. I am so proud.
On the opposition.
Mr. Chair, I'm a little bit confused with the case on the proposition bench. Because we started with a Prime Minister's speech who gave a rather mundane victim narrative of his rather lonely teenage life. And he told us that it's important that we teach children the values of good sex and what sexual satisfaction means to intimate relationships. But then the third speaker comes out and reiterates that they're not prescribing methods of sex. They're simply saying that sex needs to have some intrinsic values like love and mutual satisfaction and, etc., etc. Values that you're more likely to learn in Bible studies class than you would in sexual education. So, Mr. Chair, I have just two very simple flashpoints in today's debate. Firstly is this idea of is it of great importance to teach teens good sex? And secondly, what are the ramifications of this model? Firstly, the Prime Minister came up and in his victim narrative told us three things. First, that sex is a modern day phenomenon, and since pop culture is intricately based on sexual freedom, all teens need to know about it. Secondly, pornography and other sources of sexual knowledge is fundamentally male-dominated, and the state must provide an informational equilibrium if you must. And thirdly, parents are too grossed out to talk to their children about sex. Mr. Chair, I wish my dad was. Now, on the first response, Mr. Chair, to this idea, what's so important about having great sex? We completely reject the shallow and unreasonable premises of the government bench. The fact that sexual gratification is the essence of any intimate relationship, especially when you're 14 or 16 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, their values of love, mutual attraction, satisfaction, intimacy are not exclusive values to having good sex. Their model has to imply some sort of prescription as to how you reach that kind of level of satisfaction, which means they must prescribe certain methods to achieve that level of satisfaction. Now, what does this do? It does three things, Mr. Chair. Firstly, it puts pressures on teens because when the state places a value on sex, which is something in a personal sphere, when it says that sex must be good, or you have to be having good sex or you're not cool, this firstly harms things like sexual minority groups, like Shafiq pointed out. People who find sadomasochism or anal sex or mature grandmas to be sexually satisfying or gratifying, Mr. Chair, will be outcasted from this group because now among the teens, ladies and gentlemen, there is a certain idea or a common notion as to what is good or bad sex. On a second level, we think that this causes children, or this causes humiliation among teenagers who fail to reach this level of sexual gratification or satisfaction. So for females, for example, a girl who cannot reach an orgasm or a girl who can't feel that sexual gratification may feel humiliated. Male students who don't have or who are not well endowed or don't have very good sexual skills will not feel like they're living up to themselves or living up to their girlfriends. On the third level, we tell you that especially in schools, ladies and gentlemen, when teens get into loving relationships, and the state and their parents have to ensure that there's a certain amount of control over these children, we think that this pressure creates harm because then it forces teens or teenage relationships to be based upon that sexual gratification, and upon the failure of that gratification, it causes harm and emotional damage, etc., etc. On the third level, Mr. Chair, assuming but not conceding that sex is really important, let's talk about the idea of sources of sexual knowledge. They told you, it's a problem because porn is male-dominated. But our first response to this, Mr. Chair, is that it's a heavily subjective evaluation of pornography, ladies and gentlemen. Even in pornography, you have a wide
website, there's a wide range of categories that you can look upon. So if you feel like you're an empowered female, then look under the categories of nymphomaniac or sadomasochism. And even on porn websites, lesbians and homosexuals and transsexuals still have wide access to these kind of things. There are also more intuitive sources like Kama Sutra or 50 Shades of Grey or other romance novels, which teaches the exact values of spirituality in sexual satisfaction, values like love and intimacy. But what is harmful when the state implies or endorses a certain idea of good sex? What does this do, ladies and gentlemen? We're upset that they criticize our approach by saying that, oh, why are you trying to be conservative about sex? Why are you trying to counterattack pop culture? We say, ladies and gentlemen, that the values that we teach are inherently mutually exclusive to your side. We do teach values of intimacy. We do teach values of personal autonomy by telling children that they should wait for the right time or that they should wait for the right person before they enter into these sexual relationships. And these, we think, are important and positive values. Yes.
All these other sources like novels and pornography also create the excessively high standards that you're talking about under our paradigm. They actually was the response of the Soviet sex.
No, the point is, when the state doesn't tell you what's right, you have this wide range of sources, then you are allowed to make that decision on yourself. So even if you say, okay, I have a fetish for transsexuals, and you go with transsexuals or watch transsexual porn, you can do that in your own personal sphere, away from the that public discussion. So let's get on to this idea of public discussion. They told us we need to establish healthy public discussions on the importance of sex, and we need to better empower women and female students. On the idea of discussion sex, ladies and gentlemen, you can already get that on chat rooms or on Meagle. But we think that the kind of public discussion that they want to have in schools does not happen and is not fruitful, ladies and gentlemen, because you outcast sexual minorities or individuals who don't even like sex, ladies and gentlemen. So you already force the notion that good sex is cool, and if you don't have sex or you have bad sex, then you are a loser, ladies and gentlemen. There is better discussion and public discourse amongst teenagers when sex is not endorsed or there is no prescription upon what is right or what is wrong in terms of such a personal decision. On the last idea, on the idea of female empowerment, we don't think this is even a valid argument, because that value, ladies and gentlemen, is completely independent of how good sex is. You know, cultural and radical feminists still can't agree on the values of prostitution or porn. The fact is, you better empower females and any other student when you allow them to make rational choices by themselves when the time comes. We're very happy to propose. Thank you.
So, Speaker, it's hard for me to make sense of things when I have to associate teaching good sex, government responsibility, women empowerment, and role of schools, because it is as far removed from each other as it sounds. Because let's firstly examine the benefits from side proposition divided into STEM. Firstly, they told you good values like women empowerment. We told you already this is not mutually exclusive. Safe-sex classes too can include things like condemning male dominance, respect for women, and it's probably the case right now. They needed to justify to us why this is the only avenue to disseminate that message effectively, but they never told you so throughout the course of this debate. Secondly, they told you good sex is just as important as safe sex. We negated this. We told you it's not of equal importance and it can never be treated that way, because you can make exceptions to good sex, but you can never make exceptions to safe sex. We never had any comeback on why safe sex, on why good sex is just as important as a healthy body, which is the objective of safe sex. All the answers that they gave came from the Prime Minister, which is there's better self-esteem. We told you schools shouldn't be telling you that a good, healthy sex life or an active sex life is something you should derive confidence from. It's perfectly fine for inexperienced teens to have bad sex. And there is absolutely no harms analysis coming from why teens who have bad sex is completely an unjustifiable scenario for them to suffer. That the government should protect children from having bad sex, Mr. Speaker. The underlying premise of that is that we've never even cogent analysis on why children have a right to be informed on how to have good sex. For those who want to self-actualize that way, then that technique can exist elsewhere. That information can exist elsewhere. All they said was all porn is bad at the same school. When in the same school, you do have female-friendly porn. You do have porn that's produced by females and property respect. On the flip side, they never acknowledge our harm that your right rejects both sexual minorities and belittles sexual conservatives everywhere within the containment of these schools. Therefore, your right cannot exist. Thirdly, they told you about discourse. The But just because it's called discourse doesn't mean it's good. We gave you two responses that didn't hear any comeback. Firstly, we told you discourse will not happen because sexual preferences are personalized in nature. Whatever form your syllabus takes, it will exclude many sexual minorities. And these are the individuals who will be unable to expose themselves to the majority because your explicit definitions of what is acceptable sexual behavior. And secondly, we told you that sometimes some discourse is not better than no discourse at all. When your discourse alienates those who need it the most, which is those who are in the sexual minority, who are in need of finding their sexual identity, need to be acceptable. You're reversing that process. But B, you give no tangible benefit of what this discourse brings. Well, we told you what are the harms of this discourse. Fourthly, they told you the role of schools. They said schools should provide information because children are shy. Since the school doesn't have proper information, the school should come and flip in. We told you the opposite, that schools should be the pinnacle of the state, and therefore, firstly, should be careful that your objective is to be as inclusive to as many students as possible. I told you this will not happen when you alienate parents and you force them to recalibrate the impact of your sexual policies. No responses. Secondly, I told you it fulfills the objective of safe sex better because you're deprecating the original message of safe sex, and your frequency of sex is deprecating the point that safe sex is not always perfect. Condoms are not 100% perfect. You increasing that frequency means increasing opportunities to be vulnerable to things like STDs and in pregnancies, Mr. Speaker. And then they said, oh, you know what, if you want to talk about unrealistic expectations, see, the school already does that. Now here's a piece of analysis that they were engaged with. I told you in my first week, what is the connotation of the school fulfilling this role? We give a very disproportionate impact because school is endorsed by the state. The kind of green light that you give to the populace of the school is much more different than when you watch it on Gossip Girl, when you watch porn and suddenly decide that it's a good message or a bad message. When the school who tells you what is right and wrong tells you that you should do it, it's definitely a good message that will spread amongst the people. They never debated my point on harming the perception of sex amongst the youth and discriminating and how sexuality is personalized in nature and should be left to the exploration of those individuals. For all those reasons, we are very proud of you.
So the opposition today agreed that we're in a state where we're in an era where we have increased promiscuity not just in the greater part of society but even among teens. But they couldn't justify throughout their harms analysis and throughout all the matter that they did bring out as to why we should revert to a pious state where we must go ahead and promote abstinence. Why this natural progression of society, something that I argue, should not be respected and should not be protected against, such that we safeguard them against harm and yet allow that societal evolution. We never heard any sort of response or any sort of justification as to why we must go ahead and be that way, right? 3 points that I'll be talking about, right? Before that, the op-ed essentially brought out much of the rebuttal, and that's something I think that is of note, right? The idea on pornography was something just rebutted, the idea just rebutted right now, the idea of why we shouldn't necessarily protect kids was just rebutted right now, right? So let's do a few things. First, let's look at the course of society, right? Because that's something that they really were static about. We talked about how society is essentially fluid. There's an increasing sense of promiscuity. Then we went ahead further and argued about how there's a gap between current popular culture and the educational paradigm that we have on the state school. Right? We believe that this gap is filled by especially pernicious sources when it's only filled by things like pop culture and pornography. Right? We believe that all of these send some sort of a normative message as well because the majority of these are of one kind. Right? Even if we are to concede or assume that there are female-friendly sex, we still believe that those subtle nuances in sexual intercourse are still towards the male-dominated side because of the consumer base, right? That's something that they couldn't tackle beyond just the idea of plain brutality or plain dominance in sex, right? We also believe that, as I just mentioned, that it sends a normative message, right? We didn't necessarily see any response on this idea that why shouldn't this gap be filled by the state tool of education, right? All they said was they can find other ways to do it. We didn't see why a controlled environment is not the best way for the state to promote this message in the first place, right? The next idea, government responsibility. We said that we need to protect the kids today, right? We need to go ahead and tell them their rebuttal to this was, oh, let them have bad sex. We didn't see any necessary justification of that, considering we can protect them, considering we can tell them the basic values that you should go ahead and and hold in sexual intercourse, such as equality, such as tenderness, right? Those are some things that we believe that should be ensured regardless of the fetish that you do go ahead and bring about, right? We believe that this improves the sexual education in school, and why this shouldn't necessarily happen wasn't adequately rebutted. Their rebuttal was essentially parental wrath is something that we need to care about. I already rebutted this in my speech and we didn't hear further response on it, right? Beyond saying parents will go ahead and withdraw. But even further, right? I also said that even if parents do withdraw this, our responsibility to protect is towards the kids at the first level, and that's not something that they can justify why we shouldn't do. The next idea under the government responsibility about promoting social equality, right? Women empowerment. We believe that, and this is something that analysis that both the first two speakers provided as to why sex is particularly important because of the primal nature of sexual gratification, and why skewing in the power balances in that particular idea is something so harmful to the rest of the psyche of that individual. Never really rebutted beyond the superficial level, right? The last idea is going ahead and promoting impersonal and wide-ranging discourse within society was also something we didn't necessarily hear a response to beyond saying that individuals will not really come about and talk about it. We talked about how this would be a wide-ranging curriculum, and this would include things like homosexuality cleared in the POI, in the PM, right? The last idea that they did bring about the personal nature of sex, right? We believe that regardless of that, and this is something we've already counted, right? As to how the basics are still the same, right? Values like tenderness, values like going ahead and promoting mutually beneficial sexual intercourse. It's not something that goes ahead and changes, right? And finally, these individuals do have the freedom in any which way then to go ahead and choose, but it's the state responsibility, as is general and standard curricula, to bring a basic level that the state deems